In the heart of Minneapolis, the soft light of late afternoon filtered through the windows of Julia and Tom's cozy home. The aroma of fresh herbs and roasted garlic lingered in the air as Julia danced between ingredients, a radiant smile on her face. It was an ordinary day, but in Julia's mind, it was far from that. It was a day of celebration, a gathering of friends, a moment she had been eagerly anticipating. "Tom, did you grab the wine I left in the fridge?" Julia called out as she diced tomatoes into perfect cubes. Her husband's voice echoed from the living room, where he was arranging chairs. "Of course, love. Everything's ready here. And did you remember to put the candles on the table?" Tom replied with a playful tone as he entered the kitchen. He was an average-height man with brown hair that was starting to show the first gray strands. His smile had always been a comfort to Julia, and that night, she felt especially grateful for the life they had built together. "Don't worry, Tom. Dinner is going to be perfect," Julia said, winking at him. "I just hope our friends don't arrive too early. I need a few more minutes." As she was setting the table, the doorbell rang, and Julia's joy increased. She opened the door to greet her friends, an intimate group that always brought laughter and good energy. Among them was Sarah, a longtime friend who somehow always managed to insinuate herself into conversations in a provocative way. "Hi, Julia. It smells so good in here," Sarah exclaimed, entering with a sparkle in her eyes. "What did you prepare this time? I hope you made that special dish I love." Julia smiled, but a slight sense of discomfort enveloped her. "Yes, I made the lasagna you love. I hope you like it." The friendship between the two had always been marked by a subtle competition, but Julia tried not to think too much about it, focusing on the present moment. At the table, laughter was abundant, and the wine glasses were frequently raised. The atmosphere was light, stories were told and retold as dinner was served. However, Julia couldn't help but notice some of Sarah's comments, which seemed to have a more intimate tone than necessary. "Tom, you've always been the best at grilling meat. Julia, you should let him cook more," Sarah commented, winking at Tom. Julia forced a smile, trying to ignore the tension growing inside her. "Oh, no, I like to cook. What would our home be without my special touch?" she replied, trying to keep the tone light, even though her heart was tight. The night went on, and the conversations became more relaxed. However, Sarah's words echoed in Julia's mind like a disturbing whisper. Deep down, a small voice warned her that there was something more, something she couldn't ignore. The exchanged glances between Tom and Sarah made her stomach churn, but she decided it wasn't the moment for confrontations. The gathering was to celebrate friendship and love, not to raise suspicions. With dinner finally finished and desserts served, Julia felt relieved to see that the evening was unfolding pleasantly. But when she entered the bedroom to fetch some more wine, something made her hesitate. Tom's phone was on the table, and a notification flashed on the screen, a message she couldn't help but notice. "I'll be back in a second," Julia said, trying to sound nonchalant as she walked away from the table. As she picked up Tom's phone, her heart raced. The message that had appeared was from an unknown number, but the content was clear enough. "I can't wait to see you again." She felt a wave of unease rise through her body. With her mind racing, Julia fought against the urge to dig deeper, but curiosity and distrust began to erode her inner peace. She quickly returned to the table where Tom was telling a joke and joined in the laughter, trying to hide the unrest that now dominated her thoughts. "Is everything okay, dear?" Tom asked, noticing her momentary absence. "Yes, of course. Everything's great," she replied, but the tension hung in the air like a broken mirror, reflecting the fragility of her happiness. Julia forced a smile, but deep down, she knew that tonight would not end without her asking herself and Tom some hard questions. Julia sat on the living room sofa, her heart pounding as she stared at the computer screen. The bluish light illuminated her face, reflecting the storm of emotions consuming her. Curiosity pushed her forward, and with a click, she accessed Sarah's profile. It was a desperate attempt to understand what had happened. The photos were there, a sequence of happy moments that revealed an intimacy Julia had never known. Tom and Sarah smiling, with their arms entwined, as if they were the only ones in the world. The sight hit her like a punch in the stomach. Her hands trembled as she closed the laptop, feeling desolate. How could he do this to me? She murmured, her voice faltering. Tears streamed down her face, unstoppable. What once was a peaceful life now felt like a house of cards about to collapse. Julia stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside. The city lights twinkled, but nothing seemed beautiful anymore. Tom's betrayal left her in a state of confusion and despair. That night, the pain turned into a simmering anger. Julia decided she needed to confront Tom. While he was in the shower, she mentally prepared herself, replaying every detail of the past few weeks. When he emerged from the bathroom, a towel around his waist and his hair still wet, Tom's expression was carefree, as if nothing was wrong. "We need to talk," Julia said, her voice firm but trembling. Tom frowned, a sign that he knew something was wrong. "About what, love?" He tried to smile, but the gesture didn't convince her. Julia took a deep breath. "About you and Sarah," she shot back, her gaze fixed on his. The silence that followed was heavy, as if the atmosphere was charged with electricity. "Julia, Tom began, but she didn't want to hear his excuses. "I saw the photos, Tom. You and her. There's no denying it." The anger in her words was palpable. Tom hesitated, his expression changing from carefreeness to one of guilt. "It was a mistake, Julia. A moment of weakness," he said, his voice low. Julia laughed, a bitter laugh that echoed in the room. "A mistake? Is that what you call betrayal? A mistake?" Her tone rose, the emotion overflowing. "You broke the trust we built over years, and now you want me to just accept it? I don't want you to hate me. I love you," Tom pleaded. The sincerity in his voice only irritated her more. "Love? Do you know what love is? Love is respect, it's loyalty. You destroyed all that." The words came out with a ferocity Julia didn't know she had within her. The shock and pain were transforming into a strength she had never experienced. Tom tried to approach her, but she took a step back as if he were a flame and she was burning. "Don't come near me," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can forgive you. Not now." She left the house, the cold night of Minneapolis enveloping her like a hug. The streets were deserted, and the emptiness around her reflected what she felt inside. Julia walked aimlessly, tears streaming down her face as anger mixed with sadness. The city lights, once so welcoming, now seemed more like a reminder of everything she had lost. "Why am I doing this?" she thought as she passed through the central square. The wind blew, and the feeling of freedom began to emerge slowly. Julia realized that despite the pain, there was a flame of determination beginning to burn within her. The life she knew was fading away, and with it, the image of who she thought she was. "I need a fresh start," she whispered to herself. The journey would be long and difficult, but she knew she had the strength to face the challenges ahead. And for the first time in a long while, Julia began to feel that maybe this was the beginning of something new and unexpected. Julia sat on the floor of the small apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes. Sunlight filtered through the white curtains, creating a soft pattern on the wooden floor. She had moved in just a few days ago, but she already felt that the space was a breath of freedom. The house she shared with Tom now seemed like a graveyard of memories, filled with forced smiles and moments of tension. Here, everything felt lighter, though the pain of betrayal still lingered like a persistent shadow. With a brush in hand and a blank canvas in front of her, Julia tried to focus on the colors and shapes she used to love. Painting was an old passion, something she had set aside in the routine of married life. Now, with the blank canvas before her, she felt like a reborn artist, seeking to give life to something that had been dormant. "You still have the skill, Julia. You just need to allow yourself," she said to herself, remembering how, years ago, she would spend hours in her small art room, immersed in her creations. Taking a deep breath, she began to mix paints, creating a sea of blues and greens that symbolized her confused emotions. That morning, she decided she would allow herself to feel everything she was going through. Tears streamed down her face as she brushed the canvas with an intensity that reflected her pain. Each stroke seemed to bring forth a part of herself that had been forgotten. "I am strong. I can do this," she murmured as the colors blended into a whirlpool of feelings. The next day, while walking through the park near her new home, Julia ran into a childhood friend, Amanda, who greeted her with a warm smile. They hadn't seen each other in years, but the friendship still felt intact. "Julia, it's been so long. How are you?" Amanda asked with a concerned look. Actually, I'm trying to find myself. I just moved. I need a fresh start, Julia replied, trying to hide the pain that still consumed her. You were always so creative. Why don't you sign up for that local art exhibition? It could be a good way to showcase your work and make new connections, Amanda suggested, excited. Exhibition? I don't know, Amanda. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Julia hesitated, feeling the insecurity bubble up inside her. Of course you are. You're talented, Julia. And more importantly, you need to express yourself. Art is a form of healing. I've been through it myself, Amanda said, holding Julia's hand firmly. The confidence in her friend's words began to penetrate the armor of doubt Julia had built. Let's do it together. I can help you prepare your works. Amanda's proposal made Julia's heart race. The idea of exhibiting her art seemed like a challenge, but also an opportunity for liberation. Okay, I'll think about it, Julia replied, feeling a new surge of hope. In the days that followed, Julia worked tirelessly on her paintings, blending emotions into every brushstroke. She began to realize that instead of hiding, she was ready to assert herself. Each work became a testament to her journey, a way of turning pain into beauty. Finally, the day of the exhibition arrived. With her heart racing, Julia entered the gallery, surrounded by other artworks and artists. The smell of fresh paint and the murmur of conversations filled the air. When she saw her paintings hanging, a wave of pride washed over her. There was her soul exposed, and each gaze turned towards her works brought new meaning. As she admired her creations, Julia noticed a man standing in front of her. He was observing her with an interested look, as if he was reading every nuance of her art. You have an incredible talent, he said with a genuine smile. I'm Alex, a photographer. I can say that your works have a depth that is rare to find. Thank you, Alex. I'm just trying to find myself again, Julia replied, a bit embarrassed, but feeling an instant connection. It's a special moment for me. I understand. Sometimes art is the best path to healing. You're not alone in this, he said, with an empathetic tone. The conversation flowed naturally, and Julia felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. There was something about Alex that made her believe in the beauty of life again, even if only for a brief moment. But at the same time, an inner voice whispered to Julia that she needed to be cautious. The fear of getting hurt again hung over her like a cloud. After all, what did it mean to open up to someone else after so much pain? Julia didn't have the answer yet, but for the first time in a long time, the hope of a better future began to shine in her heart. Julia was deep in concentration, brushes in hand and a blank canvas before her. The soft light of late afternoon filtered through the window of her new apartment, bringing with it a sense of renewal. The studio had become a refuge, where each brushstroke represented not only the pain she carried, but also the strength that was beginning to emerge within her. The vibrant colors danced on the canvas, expressing a whirlwind of emotions she had kept hidden for so long. This is your new phase, Julia. Let the art speak for you, she whispered to herself as the deep blues and intense reds blended, creating an almost hypnotic effect. The memories of Tom and Sarah were still fresh in her mind, but with each layer of paint she applied, she felt lighter. Her art was becoming a symbol of healing. The next day, while working on the project, an unexpected message appeared on her phone. It was a notification from Tom. He wanted to meet. Julia hesitated, her heart racing at the thought of reliving what she had left behind. But curiosity and anger drove her to respond. Do you have something to say, Tom? She wrote, keeping her voice firm, even as nerves invaded her. His reply came quickly. Can we talk? Just the two of us. The meeting was scheduled for the next day. However, throughout the night, Julia couldn't concentrate on her art. The memories of the betrayal haunted her, making her stomach churn. I am stronger than this, she repeated to herself, trying to calm the storm of emotions. When the day came, Julia dressed meticulously. She wore a blouse that always made her feel powerful and a pair of pants that highlighted her figure. When she arrived at the cafe where they would meet, she saw Tom sitting at a table in the back. His expression was one of expectation, but Julia didn't let that affect her. Hi, Julia, he began, nervous. Thanks for coming. Let's get to the point, Tom. What do you want? She replied, crossing her arms. The defensive posture was involuntary, but necessary. I want a second chance. I made a mistake. I don't know what got into me. Sarah was a mistake, and I'm sorry, he said, looking into her eyes as if searching for a glimpse of forgiveness. Julia took a deep breath, feeling the anger and pain resurface. You think you can just ask for forgiveness and I'll go back to the life we had? You broke our trust, Tom. That doesn't get fixed with words. I know, but I want to try again. I love you, he insisted, almost pleading. Julia shook her head, her voice firm. Love isn't enough when trust is destroyed. I'm not the woman you knew anymore. I'm rediscovering myself, and you are not part of that. Tom stared at her, frustration mixed with desperation. So that's it? You're gonna leave me? Yes, I am, and you need to respect that. I deserve more than to be someone's second choice, she replied, standing up from the table. His gaze followed her, but Julia felt lighter with every step she took towards the exit. As she left the cafe, Julia ran into Alex strolling down the sidewalk. He greeted her with a warm smile, and she couldn't help but smile back. Hi, Julia. How are you? Better now, she replied, feeling a wave of relief as she spoke to him. Alex had become a constant presence in her life after the art exhibition, and the connection between them was growing. Do you want a coffee, or maybe something more relaxing, like a walk in the park? He suggested, with a sparkle in his eyes. A walk in the park sounds wonderful, Julia agreed, feeling the tension dissipate. As they walked, Alex began to share stories from his own life, revealing his experiences with betrayals and disappointments. The dialogue flowed naturally, and Julia realized that she felt comfortable around him. I used to think I would never be able to trust again, Alex confessed, looking at the sky. But I learned that every person is unique, and every experience teaches us something. That's true, Julia said, feeling understood. I don't want to carry the weight of the past. I want to open myself up to new possibilities. They continued walking, the conversation bringing them even closer. Julia realized that, although her journey was far from over, Alex's presence offered her a new perspective. Life was unfolding before her, full of new colors and opportunities, and she was ready to embrace everything that was to come. Julia was at her new workspace, surrounded by paints, brushes, and blank canvases. The soft morning light streamed through the window of her small apartment, illuminating the room and reflecting her renewed determination. However, a shadow of unease hung over her. Recently, a rumor had reached her ears. Tom and Sarah were planning to get married. The news hit her like a punch in the stomach, and a wave of anger and sadness washed over her. It was as if the betrayal, which until then seemed like a closed chapter, returned to haunt her thoughts. I can't leave this like this, Julia murmured, looking at the blank canvas in front of her. She knew she needed to confront this situation once and for all. She put the brush aside, took a sip of coffee, and took a deep breath. It was time to put an end to the cycle of pain that Tom and Sarah had started. With determination, Julia picked up her phone and typed a message to Sarah. We need to talk, today at 7 p.m. at the Corner Cafe. As soon as she sent the message, a sense of relief and anxiety washed over her. She wasn't sure what she would say, but she knew she needed to be strong. Later, at the cafe, Julia arrived first. The aroma of fresh coffee and the hum of conversations around her couldn't calm her racing heart. When Sarah entered, her expression was one of surprise, but it soon turned into a mask of indifference. Hi, Julia. What happened? Sarah asked, trying to disguise the tension in the air. Let's get straight to the point, Sarah. I heard about your engagement to Tom, Julia said, her voice firm. Do you really think that's right? Sarah gave a forced smile. Look, Julia, I'm not here to argue about personal choices. What happened between Tom and me was a mistake, but now we're together, and that's all that matters. A mistake? You destroyed my marriage and still have the audacity to minimize it as a mistake? Did you forget how close we were as friends? All the times I trusted you? Julia felt the anger rising within her, but also a new strength. You need to understand that your actions have consequences. Sarah crossed her arms, defiant. And what are you going to do? Threaten me? I'm not the villain in this story, Julia. You should look at Tom, too. I know very well who he is and what he did, Julia replied, her voice rising a little. But you had the choice not to get involved. You chose this. Silence fell for a moment as they stared at each other. Julia could see the insecurity in Sarah's eyes, and a feeling of compassion arose, but she quickly pushed it aside. This was not the time to be kind. If you really love Tom, then you need to let him go. He doesn't deserve you or me. And the truth is, you don't know what true love is, Julia challenged, her gaze penetrating. I'm not the woman you knew anymore. I'm rebuilding my life, and you have no place in it. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come out. Julia stood up, determined. I hope you think about what I said. This isn't just about me and Tom. It's about you too, and what you want to be. Julia left the cafe feeling a mix of relief and anger. She knew she had done what was needed, but the sense of betrayal was still fresh in her mind. As she returned home, her mind was filled with ideas. The pain she had been holding on to could be transformed into art. Art that would tell her story and the truth about the betrayal. Julia began to plan a new exhibition, one that would not only express her pain, but also her strength. The next day, while working on her canvases, Julia felt a new energy. The brush strokes became bolder, the colors more vibrant. Each stroke was a form of liberation. She knew she needed to expose not just her pain, but the truth that had been hidden in the shadows of her life. She was ready to turn her vulnerability into power, and with that, she would finally begin to write a new chapter of her story. Julia adjusted the tie on her blouse before facing her reflection in the mirror. The gallery opening was about to start, and the anticipation was palpable in the air. The soft lighting highlighted the works she had created, each one carrying a part of her pain and transformation. However, what bothered her most was the possibility of seeing Tom and Sarah together as a couple amidst what was supposed to be a moment of celebration. When the gallery doors opened, a stream of guests began to enter. The murmur of voices and laughter filled the space, but in the back of her mind, Julia could only focus on the entrance. And then they appeared. Tom with his carefree smile, and Sarah flaunting a dress Julia was sure was an attempt to impress her. A chill ran down her spine, but determined, she took a deep breath and turned to greet her guests. Julia, your works are incredible. I'm so proud of you, said a friend, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. Thank you, Clara. It means a lot to hear that right now, Julia replied, trying to keep her composure. As she talked, her eyes drifted to Tom, who looked uncomfortable seeing his ex-wife surrounded by admirers. She felt a wave of satisfaction as she realized he was no longer the center of her universe. When it was time for the speech, Julia stepped onto the small, improvised stage in the center of the gallery. The murmur of the crowd died down, and all eyes turned to her. The soft light illuminated her face as she prepared to share her story. Good evening, everyone, Julia began, her voice steady. I'm here today not just to showcase my art, but to celebrate freedom. The freedom to rise after a fall, to rediscover oneself after betrayal. A wave of applause encouraged her. When you find yourself trapped in a relationship where love turns into pain, it's easy to lose yourself. But I'm here to say that it's possible to find the light again. She looked directly at Tom, who was visibly uneasy. Betrayal can destroy, but it can also be the catalyst for transformation. Every brushstroke you see here represents a part of my rebirth. Julia paused, allowing her words to resonate before continuing. And for those who think betrayal is a form of love, remember, it's a choice that destroys lives. The applause grew louder, and Julia realized she was winning over her audience. Sarah, beside him, tried to maintain an indifferent expression, but Julia could see the tension on her face. Today isn't just about me, it's about all the women who have ever felt betrayed, humiliated, but who rose and shone again. Then one of the guests, a man Julia didn't recognize, raised his hand. Sorry to interrupt, but didn't you know that Tom had another affair? The murmur immediately spread through the gallery. Julia felt her heart race, and all eyes turned to Tom, who was now pale. What do you mean by that? Tom asked, his voice faltering. I saw the messages, Tom. You weren't just with Sarah, the man continued, with a look of contempt. There was another woman, and your messages are exposed in Julia's works. Did you think you could get away with it? The air grew tense. Julia felt a wave of satisfaction, a sense of justice finally achieved. Tom, now surrounded by accusatory looks, had no way out. You can't do this to me, he shouted, but his voice sounded weak. Actually, I can, Julia responded, her tone firm and determined. And I will. I'm not afraid of you anymore." She turned to the guests, who were now in an uproar, talking among themselves about the revelation. "This is the truth, and I'm here to expose it." Sarah's look, which had been full of arrogance earlier, was now filled with insecurity and shame. Julia smiled inwardly, knowing she had freed herself from all the chains that had held her back. "Today is my day. Today, I am free." Julia stepped off the stage, feeling a wave of empowerment. Looking at the gallery full of people who supported her, she realized that she had found herself again. The past had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. It was time to move on, and she was ready to embrace everything the future had to offer. When love turns into a nightmare of betrayal, it's inevitable that you'll question all your choices. But can that pain be turned into something positive? Maybe this experience is showing you something you haven't realized yet, a path you need to follow to rediscover yourself and learn to value who you really are. Have you ever stopped to think that sometimes betrayal can be a push for a fresh start, a chance to rewrite your own story? Reflecting on this can change the way you view the situation and help you find a new perspective. If this story touched you in any way, also check out the video that's appearing on your screen now. In my opinion, it's one of the best stories I've ever told. And if you liked the one you just heard, you'll definitely love this other story too. So subscribe to the channel, click on the video on your screen now, and I'll see you in a few seconds.